everyone, I'm Lila McDonald, your host for NZ Business Magazine's podcast, Sustainably Ever After, proudly brought to you by the Milford Foundation, a charity investing in local communities to build a stronger Aotearoa New Zealand. I'll be exploring the incredible world of sustainability and entrepreneurship. On this podcast, I'll be talking to guests who are making waves in the world of sustainability, those who have built businesses with a purpose, those striving to make their companies greener, and those leading the charge for social and environmental change. Welcome to Sustainably Ever After. I'm your host, Lila McDonald, and today I'll be talking to Michal Garvey about how she's battling food waste with her app Foodprint. The Milford Foundation, supporting education, youth and the environment to build a better tomorrow for all New Zealanders. Find out more at milfordfoundation.co.nz. Michal Garvey was working at a hotel buffet overseas when she saw firsthand the amount of food waste generated by a single establishment. Michal describes the experience as heartbreaking and knew there must be something she could do to help, especially since 60% of all food waste is completely avoidable. That's what started her journey of founding Foodprint, a food rescue app that works with hundreds of cafes, restaurants and supermarkets to help reduce their food waste.
The majority of food that ends up being wasted goes to landfill, and landfill is not the right conditions for food to break down. I think a lot of people have the perception of it's biodegradable, so we can put it in the bin, it will go to landfill and then it will break down, but it doesn't. What it does when it goes to landfill and breaks down is it emits methane, which is a really powerful greenhouse gas.
Thanks so much for coming.
Kia ora, Lila. Thanks for having me.
So I read that you were working during the summer uni breaks at a ski resort in Colorado while you were going to uni in New Zealand. Can you tell me a bit about that experience?
Yeah, so when I was at uni, I started snowboarding. Me and my best friend started snowboarding, and we decided that we were going to head over to Colorado and do a ski season in the New Zealand summer. So obviously with the switch in hemispheres, our summer is their winter. And we got jobs at a hotel, and I was working as a banquet server. So what that meant is serving the sort of buffet breakfasts and hosting events in the hotel. And obviously with buffets, there tends to be quite a bit of waste. So part of my job there was actually involved throwing food in the bin. And it was such a heartbreaking experience. And I think that really kind of started forming some of the early ideas around me wanting to work in that space. I didn't really know it at the time, but I think that was the real early seeds growing for me.
Yeah, so you're also vegan. Were you vegan at that time or did that come later?
I was vegetarian at that time, so I stopped eating meat. I think I was about 16, so probably similar age to you now. And I can remember I'd come out of this geography class. We were studying something to do with farming, I think. And we'd been talking about sort of the amount of crops that animals eat. And I just had this moment of why are we growing all these crops to feed to animals and then eating the animals when actually we can just cut out the animal and feed the crops ourselves? And the sort of intensity required of farming, if it's just humans consuming the plant materials, is significantly lower than if the animals are doing it in between. So yeah, I sort of stopped eating meat at that time and sort of went I sort of try and use the term plant-based most of the time because I'm sometimes bend the rules if I want a little bit of rescued cake from the app. But yeah, sort of went in that direction just after I started Foodprint, and that was me really feeling like I wasn't doing enough. So I wanted to do as much as I possibly could personally in the food space. So that drove that decision.
Wow, okay. So you then moved to London and worked for a meal kit company for a while before moving to Sweden for a year. Can you tell me about that journey and how it led you to starting Foodprint?
Yeah, so I guess to go back to sort of the university conversation, so I finished university in New Zealand and I worked for a startup here in New Zealand for a few years after that. And I just sort of always knew that I wanted to do the standard Kiwi OE to London. My sister had gone, I'd had friends that had gone over, and it was just always something I wanted to do. So it was really hard for me to leave my job that I'd had here for 3.5 years. I adored that role, but I was really ready for that next step. And then sort of coincidentally ended up getting a job at a meal kit company in London. And I guess that was my sort of introduction into food tech, and that understanding of sort of the way that we're using technology to source our food, buy our food, that sort of interaction. And as part of that role, we also talked a lot about food waste. So meal kits are really great for reducing food waste in the home. You don't end up with half a jar of something that you're never going to use again, or you get the exact sort of portions of vegetables and things like that. So yeah, that really became a huge part of that conversation, and just, I guess, kind of re-sparked those inklings that I mentioned of, being a teenager and sort of having that understanding of the impacts that food has on climate change, and then, that experience of actually throwing food out as part of my job. And then that next step was sort of the food technology side of things. So yeah, I was in London for the 2 years, and I wasn't quite ready to go home, and I was sort of looking at what was going to be next for me. And it was sort of a combination of moving to Sweden, but also doing an online web development course. And it just sort of felt like I wanted to do both of those things, or I sort of found the course and doing it and studying it in Sweden felt like a really great opportunity for me. And I think that was sort of sparked from, I guess I didn't have a huge sort of tech understanding, and I'm still no tech genius. I didn't write the code for Foodprint, but what it did was just give me that next layer of understanding of how things are put together, of how the technology side of things worked. And it sort of came about out of some frustrations that I'd had at my job in London, where I didn't have that level of understanding, and therefore I was struggling to communicate things to either, my boss or our field sales team or whoever it was across the company. So I'd sort of started dabbling in some independent courses while I was there, and then went on to do the supported course. And I think what that gave me was just a really good understanding and the knowledge and the confidence to be able to come home and start what would become Foodprint.
So once you had the idea of Foodprint, how did you make it happen? How did you get funding and find a team and customers?
Yeah, so I guess to be totally honest, I saw, while I was living in Sweden, I saw other apps across Europe and in Sweden as well doing similar things to Foodprint. And I just thought, this is the coolest idea ever. It really was something that resonated with me. It fit in my values and sort of fit with the rest of that experience that I sort of talked about earlier. And I sort of made that decision of, all right, I've been away for 3 years now, and it is time for me to head home. And I sort of came home with a real one-track mind that starting Foodprint was what I was going to do. And so I guess I'd started doing a little bit of research and a bit of sort of initial scoping whilst I was still living overseas. I think I came home, gave myself about a week's grace to do some unpacking, catch up with some family and get over the jet lag. And then I just sort of, I guess, hit the ground and started networking and started trying to figure out how I would pull this thing together, what it would look like. So, that included putting posts on LinkedIn and on Facebook and things like that, just wanting to connect with web developers. And I couldn't even tell you how many coffees I went and had over that kind of couple of month period. And I think, there was lots of conversations where I'd sit down and kind of initially go, oh, you're not the right person to build Foodprint or to partner with, but having a conversation with you, I'll learn a whole lot of other things. So I kind of look at those conversations as that none of them were wasted time. There was all sort of learnings. And then I caught up with actually a friend who I'd met whilst I was living in London, and he recommended a team to me. They're a small sort of husband and wife agency. They're based here in Auckland. They're called Seven Glyphs, and they, really helped bring Foodprint to life, and they're still with us to this day. So they do a really amazing job. And in terms of funding, I'm super lucky and grateful that I was able to tap into some family funding, which means that myself and my family still 100% own Foodprint, which is great.
Yeah. So would you have any advice for other people who are looking to start businesses like Foodprint but don't know where to start?
Yeah, I think, honestly, it's such a cliched bit of advice, but the biggest thing is just getting started. I think so many people have the ideas and then they just get the block of getting started. And it is really daunting because you don't necessarily know where to start. But I think one thing that really blew me away was how generous New Zealanders tend to be with their time. So reaching out to other business leaders, whether that's within the same sort of sector that you want to get into or someone that you admire, and asking them for a coffee and seeing how they can help you. But also going into those coffees with a really specific ask. You know, you don't want to ask someone and just say like, oh, will you meet me for a coffee? Tell me how to start a business. You want to sort of, you know, say to them, this is what I want out of this conversation, and really, have that sort of, what is your ask essentially out of that. And I think the other part about that is, you know, do respect, whilst I said Kiwis tend to be really generous, and we are, also do be respectful of the fact that not everybody will be able to say yes, and it might be that they can't say yes right now, or, you know, whatever the case may be. I definitely get asked all the time for coffee and advice and this and that, and I do try and, you know, pay it forward as it was paid to myself, but I also have to be mindful that, you know, meeting someone for an hour might come at the cost of meeting a deadline within the business for myself. So, you know, if I genuinely think that there is something that I can give that person, then I will try and say yes. And I think the other aspect of that is, instead of just doing cold outreaches, is going to events and networking events and things like that, where you can have even just an off-the-cuff 5-minute conversation with someone, and that might be enough advice from that person, or you might spark up a relationship with them and, you know, then be like, then you might feel more comfortable to be able to ask them for a coffee or that kind of thing. But yeah, I mean, just getting started, putting pen to paper, figuring things out. There's also loads of support around Aotearoa for startups. So I've been lucky enough to take part in 2 accelerator programs. So in 2020, I did the Sprout Accelerator, and the following year I did the Climate Response Accelerator by Creative HQ. And both of those agencies run startup accelerators specifically. And there's others dotted around the country as well who do similar things. So finding support like that. We're in a sort of interesting space where last week, sorry to put a timestamp on the recording, but last week Callaghan Innovation, it was announced, would be disestablished. They have provided a wealth of support to me. So watching out for sort of what ends up taking that space is another really good sort of direction to point people in. And also listening to podcasts. I listened to so many business podcasts in the early days, and you do take out little nuggets. So yeah, it's really just about getting started, and the rest will follow.
Yeah, great. So can you please explain what Foodprint actually is?
Yeah, so Foodprint is a food rescue app. So we partner with local eateries to give them a platform to sell surplus and imperfect food for a discount to help prevent that from going to waste. And so what that means in the kind of everyday is, if you think about when you walk into like a cafe or maybe a sushi shop, they've only got a couple of hours left and they've got like a half full cabinet and they're pretty empty, you know, and that happens, you know, it might be a rainy day or there's roadworks outside, things that can really influence the performance, or it's just a day where everyone's decided to work from home. You know, that food traditionally would end up in the bin, it might get given away, it maybe sometimes staff take it home. I think that's one of the things that I really learned in hospitality is the first couple of weeks you're super excited to be taking the food home, and after that you're like, oh my God, if I have to look at this like blueberry muffin one more time. So, you know, staff obviously don't always want it, neighbours don't always want it. Essentially, that food can get put onto Foodprint for a discount. Everything's discounted from at least 30% off the original price. And then it will notify our customers who are in the area what food is available. And then customers can purchase that within the app and then go to that eatery before they close to pick it up. So rescuing that food from potentially ending up wasted.
Yeah, that's really cool. Can you please explain why food waste matters for climate change?
Yeah, so food waste and climate change are so intertwined. I actually read something this morning that food can account for up to a third of total emissions. So something to do with food, and whether that's the energy that's used in producing the food, the water, the transport emissions, all of that. So up to a third of all emissions are related to food. And then when you look at food waste specifically, there's a bunch of research by people a whole lot smarter than me that have identified that up to 10% of total emissions are from food waste alone. So just repeat that, 10% of total emissions are from food waste. So again, that is including those emissions used to produce that food, because obviously if we've produced food that then ends up being wasted, those are just totally lost, dead emissions that we just should never have created to start with. And then the majority of food that ends up being wasted goes to landfill. And landfill is not the right conditions for food to break down. I think a lot of people have the perception of it's biodegradable, so we can put it in the bin, it will go to landfill, and then it will break down. But it doesn't. What it does when it goes to landfill and breaks down is it emits methane, which is a really powerful greenhouse gas. And methane sort of has up to 20 to 30 times the heat trapping capabilities of carbon dioxide, but it does have a shorter sort of life. So methane it'll do a huge amount of impact, huge amount of damage in a shorter period of time, whereas CO2 will kind of spread its damage out over a longer period of life. So I guess that's sort of, some of the real top line stuff. But then if you take it another layer down, our ability to grow food is so reliant on the right climate conditions. And so it's really important that we reduce our emissions and keep the planet in a state where it has the ability to actually grow the food that we need. And I think we're about 2 years on the Auckland anniversary floods. And I don't know if you remember, but do you remember the pictures of the onions rolling down the road in Pukekohe? And that was, the onions that had been pulled out of the ground. And with onions, they leave them in the paddock for a couple of weeks to kind of dry out before they go back and pick them all up and, ship them off to various places where they'll end up in our homes. So that's, I guess, highlighting that impact of how we all end up losing more and more food if we don't kind of mitigate climate change. And then we see the loss of soil, we're using that nutrients to grow that food, the soil, the water, everything that's going into that. So if we're just losing it, we're just continuing to take, and we just can't do that anymore. Yeah, I think that's probably covered. No, there's one more thing. I think the other aspect of it is that it's expensive. Throwing food away is expensive. And if you think about that stat that we're throwing away a third of the food that we produce, we're actually paying for that in the 2/3 of the food that we consume. So businesses, right across the food system will build in a percentage for waste. And that doesn't matter, what that sort of goes right from growers right through to people, to retailers. They build in a price of waste. And so we literally are paying for it with our pocket as well as our environment.
Wow. So I'll admit I didn't know that putting food into landfill was bad. But if a business is forced to dispose of food because they couldn't sell it or sell on Foodprint or anything, what's the best way to dispose of it?
So if food is going to be disposed of, definitely composting or turning it into animal feed is 100% the answer there. So long as it's not going to landfill, landfill should be our absolute last resort. And we talk about, a waste hierarchy. And with Foodprint, we've got our own sort of Foodprint food waste hierarchy. And right at the top of that is that the businesses should be selling the food at full price. Like, we obviously fully support that. That is their number one goal. And then we're the layer under that. So if they haven't sold it at full price in store, then popping it on Foodprint is their next best option. Then you get under that and things like giving it away to neighbours, to staff. Most of the businesses that we work with aren't the right type of business to work with food rescue organisations, but there are some that do, and they sort of serve quite a different market to us at Foodprint. And we also obviously really support businesses giving to food rescue organisations if they can do. And then under that is, feeding to animals, then composting, then landfill as an absolute last resort. Personally, I would say that the only food that should be going to feed animals or to compost is food that's not fit for human consumption. So food that is fit for human consumption only belongs in one place, and that is in human bellies, nourishing us, feeding us, providing us joy. Food is, for me, it's such an emotional, it's a fun, it's a pleasurable activity. So that's what it's designed to do. And then, your compost and your animal feed is things like scraps, peelings. If something has been in the fridge a little bit too long and it's past the point of being edible, that's the stuff that should be going in scraps. And likewise for us as consumers, much of the country now has our own food scraps bins that are collected by our councils. And on top of that, I'm trying composting or worm farming at home. So at home I run a worm farm, but I also use the council food scraps bin for some items as well.
Do you have any tips for businesses to reduce food waste to begin with, so that, there's no need to throw anything out? Or because I'm assuming that, obviously Foodprint helps a lot, but I'm assuming that there's still waste at the end of that.
Yeah, so I think one of the biggest things is forecasting. And I genuinely think that most businesses are really good at forecasting. They know kind of what they're going to sell and make each day, and they know what that looks like. One thing that I have heard is in the kind of, I hate that I'm still bringing this in, but in the sort of post-COVID world, the previous forecasts are kind of a bit out the window in a lot of ways. So in the past, businesses would say, well, on Monday we sell this much, on Tuesday we sell this much, on Wednesday we sell this much, and they would know that for the entire week. And it would be, within a small margin of error, pretty much bang on. But what happens now is that people work from home a couple of days a week. But someone this week might work from home on Monday and Tuesday, but next week they're working from home on Wednesday and Friday, and the following week they're Tuesday and Thursday. And so if they're a regular at a business, and whether it's just that they go in for a coffee and a cheese scone each day, or that they go and get their lunch there once a week, that day where in a pre-COVID world might have been more consistent, now it's moving all over the place. And so businesses going, we had a really killer Tuesday last week. It was so busy. Let's make, and we sold out by 1:30. We need to make more food this week. Well, it turns out that there was a team day and everyone in the building was mandated to be in the office last Tuesday. But this Tuesday, it's raining and it's windy. So no one's come to the office, and this business has got a whole lot of food that they've produced. And they're going, well, what the heck are we going to do with it? And so that's where Foodprint kind of helps fill that gap for them.
Yeah, okay. So going back a bit, when you first started Foodprint, you needed both food businesses and customers to make the app work. So how did you get enough users in the beginning?
Yeah, so I started with the businesses. So I have sort of always started with the businesses slightly before going for the users or the customers. And I guess in the very, very early days, I had gone around doing a bit of research, and I had a Google form that I had about 3 or 4 questions. And I'd just kind of chat to people. You know how I said I had all those coffee meetings? I'd usually have them in the afternoon, and I'd finish the meeting and I'd go out to pay and be like, all right, cool, can I just ask you a few questions to the people working there? And so I was able to sort of go back to some of those businesses that I'd spoken to early on And then I sort of went around with my laptop and this little presentation that I'd made up like on PowerPoint or something. It was like, if Canva existed in the day, I certainly didn't know about it. And I think my designers would have had a heart attack if they'd seen what I'd pulled together, if I'm honest. But I was just kind of testing like a little sales pitch with a little presentation. And then after I'd sort of done that a few times and refined it, I got like a proper something designed up and went for it that way. So yeah, a lot of just sort of door knocking basically of businesses. And I'd come from a sales background, so that didn't really scare me too much. And then sort of migrated it from in-person to on the phone. So a lot of what we do now for our B2B acquisition is through phone calls and online meetings. Obviously, it's a bit more time effective and a lot less emissions involved with driving around different parts of the country. But there is obviously still a place for in-person meetings as well. And then in terms of finding customers, I was so lucky and was introduced to this amazing woman who helped me with my PR and marketing when we first launched. So I'd gone around and got about 50 businesses on board. And then, I got introduced to, her name's Sarah Page, and she actually runs a really amazing charity called the Kindness Collective now. So she helped with my marketing and PR and just did the most amazing job at getting my face and name everywhere in the first couple of weeks. And so that really planted the seed for us to get a huge number of users in the first few weeks. I think it was about 3 weeks and I had 10,000 accounts created on the app, which when I tell that to a lot of people, including yourself, Lila, I just saw those eyes light up. They sort of, wonder if I've added an extra zero or something like that. But we were just able to kind of create that story. And I think at that time it was just before COVID. It was sort of off the back of, school strike for climate marches and things like that. Climate change was so front and centre for people. And so sort of a homegrown climate solution that also allowed people to eat delicious cake was just right place, right time. And, that is often a huge part of running a startup as well, is time and place. And then from there, we've just continued to sort of add more eateries, add more users, and then adding more regions. And we sort of do a fairly similar thing when we add a new region. So we start talking to the businesses first, and then once we've got them all lined up, that's when we sort of push play and tell our customers that we're there. Yeah, but I think Foodprint's also a two-sided marketplace, and if I'd sort of been aware of the challenges that actually brings of making sure that you've got enough businesses, enough food and enough customers buying it, all kind of happening at the same time. Yeah, if I'd known that in sort of 2018, I'm not sure if we'd be sitting here, but, that's also part of it. That sort of ignorance is bliss, and you learn a lot along the way, and, you work out how to sort of mitigate the issues that come up. And yeah.
Yeah. So how many regions are you in now?
Oh, that's a really good question, and I should have counted before I came in here. We are so we're in Auckland, we're in sort of Tauranga Mount, we're in Rotorua, Taupo, Hamilton, like few throughout the Waikato. We're in Wellington, Nelson, Canterbury and Dunedin. So I don't know, there's a few sort of smaller cities and towns in there. But definitely going for nationwide coverage and getting there. So always, every year we're just adding a few more regions. And it's really important that whilst we are adding new regions, that we're also making sure that we're maintaining the regions that we're already in as well. So it's always a balance, and we are constantly getting people reaching out from all over the country saying, oh, when are you coming to Whangarei or Invercargill or Queenstown? And we're like, we're working on it. So, we are really keen to, or I'm really keen to make Foodprint available right across the country, but we just know we have to do it properly. So, and we know how to do that. So it's just a case of giving us the time to roll out that process. And we're also a really small team. So there's just myself and 4 others. So we are doing a lot with not a huge amount of resource. So I think a lot of people are also often surprised at just how small and lean the team is. But we do amazing things and we have a lot of fun whilst we're doing it.
What have been the biggest challenges of expanding?
Again, that fun old COVID one, that definitely put a dampener on our ability to expand. I sort of came into 2020, I had the support of the accelerator program behind me, and I was like, great, I've had 6 months, this is what I've done, now help me replicate this throughout the country and let us expand. And then instead it just turned into this like real scramble of survival. So that was definitely a real challenge. I think for me, it's all about picking the right region at the right time. And also what I've learnt is that even though we're, a tiny little country, we're only 5 million people, every region is so different. And so the more that we spend that time on the ground doing that research, really getting to know what the market is in that new region, that's where we sort of end up with the most successful launches. And yeah, time of year can be really funny and fickle in regions as well. Like we have to be mindful of public holidays and school holidays and, other events that are in town that sort of consume people, and make sure that we're sort of getting in at a point when the market is actually right. And, there's been a couple of times that we've given it a whirl and it hasn't been so right. And then it's a case of like, all right, cool, what do we do from here? Do we pivot it? Do we pause it? Do we, backtrack? Do we extend? Like there's many different scenarios, and it's all just dependent on where you are physically and where you are in sort of timing wise. So yeah, again, that's all part of the fun and the learnings that come along with it.
Yeah, so I just want to clarify, because I think I read that Foodprint is free to download. So I'm assuming, do you take a percentage of everything sold?
Yeah. So Foodprint is free for customers to download, and it's also free for eateries to join. And yeah, we take a percentage of each purchase. It means that we are only making money when the businesses are, and we take a very small percentage, especially compared with other sort of food apps. And for us, it's, it really is about supporting those businesses and making sure that they're getting something back in their pocket. And I guess from the business perspective as well, if they sort of start with thinking about, well, how much has this food item cost me to make? If they're potentially going to throw it in the bin, that's a loss to the business, right? So if they start there and go, okay, cool, well, even with the discount and even with the percentage that Foodprint takes, we're still not at a loss. We're not in the negative. We might not be making our full profit, but we are in the positive. And Foodprint's bought us a new customer who we've never seen before. And sometimes when that customer's picking up their food, they've bought a coffee, or they've gone, hey, I didn't know that you even existed, despite the fact that you're 1 block from my office, because every time I come and go from my office, I turn left, and today I turned right to find you. And like, oh, hello, new favorite spot. So that's the sort of anecdotal feedback that we get from both eateries and customers alike. Or it might be from the customer's perspective, like, oh, I've seen that food and I really like it, but I either just flat out can't afford it, or I don't know if I want to pay that much money for something. And if you think about the times at the moment, that's what everybody's saying with almost every purchase they're making. And then they'll try it on Foodprint and think, oh, damn, that was so good. I'm going to go back and get that as a treat, either through Foodprint or direct to the business. And at the end of the day, for us, either of those scenarios mean that food's not getting wasted. So that's a win.
Do brands ever worry? Because I think, especially for big businesses and food companies, I think a lot of the time they throw food out because they don't want, their brand to be seen as a discount brand, or they don't want to lose money on discounting things. Is that ever a concern for businesses? Is that, a problem?
Yeah, I think it is something that businesses might sort of push back on a little bit from time to time. I think the real differentiation with Foodprint is we're not asking them to put, a 50% off sign that one of their staff has scribbled on the back of a paper bag and put at the till or something like that. It's a little bit of a like, if you know kind of club, And so the alternative perception to that is that they're actually showing their commitment to, food waste reduction, to sustainability. by being part of Foodprint. And that is what is driving a lot of consumer decision making these days as well. You know, people want to know sort of what the ethos of the brand that they're spending their money with is. And so, yeah, we would sort of counter that and say, well, we're not actually devaluing your product. We're adding value. We're bringing you new customers. We're putting more money in your bank account every week. Those are, you know, some of the biggest things that businesses want, right? New customers and money in the bank account. And we're helping you tell your sustainability story instead of just pretending that this is something that doesn't happen and continuing to put food or money, you know, if you think about food being money in the bin in a way that's also creating emissions and damaging our planet, then, you know, there's a whole lot more sort of positive perception on it than that potential negative. And the other aspect is that the eateries are in control of what they list on the app and when. So we don't put any restrictions on saying you have to use Foodprint every single day. It is there for the days that they need it. And so it doesn't sort of drive customers like kind of hanging around waiting for it, which kind of couples with what you were saying around that worried about brand perception in that negative way, because customers don't necessarily know exactly what's going to go on the app, at what time, from what eatery. It's a bit of a roll the dice gamble. So
it's not like, oh, I get a scone every day, now I'm just going to wait until it's discounted.
Yeah, exactly. And if you think about your own behaviours, like if you wanted a scone every day, you're probably buying that scone at like 9 or 10 o'clock in the morning. Like that's scone time, or in my opinion, that's kind of scone time. Whereas like with Foodprint, it might be a real different time of the day, or it's not, you know, fitting in with your day necessarily, but it might be great for like, oh, I skipped lunch and I'm actually going to grab that scone at 3 p.m. today because I know that that's going to be there and waiting for me when I show up to the eatery.
Yeah. So the app also shows how much emission CO2 has been prevented. How do you measure that?
Yeah, so we have a calculation in the app, and it's sort of a widely accepted calculation based on weight of food and translating that into emissions. It's an approximate number because obviously different food items have different emissions associated with them. But again, a bunch of research done by people much smarter than me have sort of come up with that being the correct calculation for Aotearoa. And so, yeah, that's what we've got in there. And for me, it was really important that we are showing that in the app. I think it differentiates us from sort of your standard food delivery app out there in the market, and really showing our purpose that we are about rescuing food, and that this is the difference that you can make simply by eating cake. You know, like, how much better can it be?
I don't think any better. Yeah, that's really cool. Do you know how much you have saved? Like, how much does it say that you saved?
Yeah, so altogether we've saved about 225 tonnes of CO2. And I was actually, before I came in here, trying to have a little bit of a look to see what that could translate to, but I couldn't find anything. So I'm really sorry, but it's often quite hard to translate emission savings.
Yeah, that's amazing. So you also have, I think, a new thing on your app called mystery bags. Can you tell me what that is and what inspired it?
Yeah, so we started doing mystery bags a wee while ago, but we really pushed them last year. And what this did was just give eateries a bit more flexibility and a little bit more confidence with using the app. One of the concerns, and it's honestly something that's so minimal that it's more of a like perceived concern than an actual concern, if that makes sense, was like, well, what if we put something on the app and then someone buys it in store and then we can't fulfill that order? Like, it has happened. Like, I would be lying if I said it hadn't, but it's such a minimal issue for us as a business. And we've sort of got some guidance around what they should do in that situation anyway. But what a mystery bag is, we've just said, okay, cool, set a price. Normally it's like $10 on the app for 50% off, so $5. And it's usually going to have sort of 2 to 4 items in it. Some eateries will load them up. Like if they've had a real doozy, they might go, oh, we'll just put like 4 or 5 mystery bags on, but we'll stuff them full of stuff. So you might get more items. Sometimes if it's like, you know, a really massive portion of salad or something like that, you might only end up with one, but it's still going to be to that original value of that $10. And we sort of started testing this concept and kind of, I guess, just playing off, there's lots of different brands out there that do mystery bags of really different products like clothing, drink bottles, bedding, like everyone's sort of doing it. We were like, oh, what's the Foodprint version of this? And I think for some people, they absolutely love that. Like, oh my gosh, I have to know what is in that bag, or I really love that eatery, or I'm so just in a habit of eating the same things. Let me grab a mystery bag and it's going to force me to try something different. And yeah, it's a bit of a like roll the dice and see what you're going to get, but it's just a really fun way of adding something else to Foodprint. We obviously still have lots of eateries doing individual items or sort of coupling specific items together, which, can often be a better option for people like you and I who've got dietary requirements, unless it's really specified. A mystery bag might not be for us. But for people that, are a bit more adventurous and want to try something new, then that element of surprise has just been really fun. And it's really cool to see the eateries getting really creative with what they want to put in a mystery bag and sort of create a little meal for someone or an afternoon sweet treat kind of bag and that sort of thing.
Yeah, that's really cool. I'm hating that I'm gluten-free right now. But anyway.
I'll find you one.
Are there any other solutions to food waste that you've been seeing and are excited about?
Yeah, I think the food waste space is really interesting at the moment and it is becoming really innovative, which is super cool. Obviously, there's us who are dealing sort of with that retail sector. There's the guys at Wonky Box who are doing fruit and veg delivery boxes, kind of like a mystery box as well. You don't necessarily know what you're going to get in there. There's other businesses who are upcycling products, so taking a product that was previously deemed as waste and creating a value product out of that. So there's, breads, there's baking, there's people doing beer in that kind of sense. I think the kind of OG of the upcycle product was Marmite, which was the yeast extract coming off beer was like a waste product. And so they sort of took it and created something out of it. And that's the really rough idea of how Marmite came to be, like all of that time ago. So the idea of upcycling is not necessarily new, but I think it's definitely getting a big sort of spotlight at the moment. And it is cool. There's definitely, and I think it's getting that spotlight here in Aotearoa and also around the world. And there's heaps of really fun innovation that's coming out of that. I think one thing I'm always mindful of is just making sure that we are creating a value add product and not kind of taking foods that were actually still edible for human consumption, putting them through a whole lot more processes, aka creating a whole lot more emissions with them and then kind of repurposing them as something else. So just making sure that we're sort of, being mindful of that. But yeah, the food waste reduction sector in Aotearoa is like this amazing community. So there's, sort of the few startups doing our things. There's a huge network of food rescue organisations. So they've all kind of come together under an umbrella as well. And there's also, I think we've had 3 now, and they sort of happen every couple of years, but food waste summits. So we all kind of come together for a day and have a talk about what's happening. There has been a huge amount of sort of government policy work done. Unfortunately, just before Christmas, a huge portion of that got put on hold, which was quite disheartening to see for those who are sort of in the sector and on the ground and understanding it. But that's what happens, and we need to make sure that we're aware of these things when it comes to making our decisions in future elections. But yeah, there's a huge amount of like innovation in mahi. There's also sort of a network of businesses that come together under what's called the Kai Commitment. So that sort of make a bit of a pact for businesses to reduce food waste. I think one of the biggest challenges from sort of all of the conversations that I've been a part of is around us really sort of having that baseline data to measure the issues. Yeah, so there is heaps going on, and it is exciting. It is really cool to see us sort of driving that change and, helping Aotearoa actually achieve the Sustainable Development Goal target 12.3, which is to reduce food waste by half by the year 2030, with lacking that baseline data that is quite hard to sort of measure and make sure that we are on track. But we've still got 5 years to get that data out there and get that measuring happening. So I think, Foodprint's part of that, and some of those others that I have mentioned are also part of that, helping count those numbers. Yeah.
So, we talked about earlier, eventually you want to have the whole of New Zealand using Foodprint. Do you have any other plans for the future?
Yeah, so I guess the other thing that we've really been doing over the past sort of 6 to 12 months is really diversifying the offering on the app. So when we first started, it was very much kind of that sort of cafe, bakery, sushi, grab and go type food. But we have sort of started working with a few more food retailers. We've got some smaller scale supermarkets, grocers on there. And the other thing that's really exciting a lot of people at the moment is fruit and veg boxes. So we've partnered with quite a few greengrocers who will put up their sort of seconds. I actually, just at the weekend, I picked up 2.5 kilos of nectarines for $3, which just kind of felt crazy how cheap that was. I think they're about $9 or $10 a kilo in the supermarket, so really good. And they're a little bit squishy on the skin, but with a nectarine, it's just so sweet inside. I was eating one and I was saying to my friend, this is the nectarine I remember from my childhood, where it was just so sweet and juicy and delicious. So, cosmetically, they didn't look as good, and we've been taught that if it's a little bit wrinkly, then it's not good. But actually, once you peel that skin back, it was absolutely delicious inside. So, we've really been kind of diversifying that offering. And then, I'm always kind of keeping a lookout for some new opportunities. So there's a little bit of watch this space in that area as well.
Very exciting. What do you want your legacy to be?
I knew this one was coming, and it's such a toughie. I think for me, I really want Foodprint to be playing that part in reducing food waste in Aotearoa. And I also want us to be helping to educate people around food waste and what the actual issues are, and the really easy changes that we can all make that actually, make a huge difference. As I said right at the start, food waste accounts for a huge amount of greenhouse gas emissions. What I didn't say earlier is that there's this international think tank called Project Drawdown, and they've gone away and done all the research around what the best climate solutions are, or what all the climate solutions are, and they've ranked them. And guess what sits right at the top?
What?
Reducing food waste. So, it really is a problem that just shouldn't exist, and it's one that can really drive change in the climate space, more so than a lot of others that might get, a lot more airtime.
It does seem crazy that food waste isn't talked about more in the conversation of climate change and reducing emissions, especially when you look at the statistics. In New Zealand alone, cafes, restaurants and supermarkets produce 50,000 tonnes of food waste, and it makes up 8 to 10% of global emissions. Foodprint creates an easy solution to reduce those numbers. They have managed to save around 225 tonnes of CO2 so far, and I can't wait to see where they go. Foodprint currently operates in 7 regions with plans to expand to the whole of New Zealand. If you want to learn more about Foodprint, you can search it up on the App Store or follow them at foodprint.nz. Thank you so much for listening. That was Michal Garvey from Foodprint on Sustainably Ever After. A special thanks to sponsors of this podcast, the Milford Foundation, working to create a sustainable New Zealand for future generations. Learn more at milfordfoundation.co.nz. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast and stay tuned to nzbusiness.co.nz for more details on upcoming episodes and bonus podcast material. Let's make our world more sustainable, one story at a time. See you soon!